Dated from before humans created dog breeds, two dog skeletons, both 11,000 years old, were discovered. Scientists uncovered something impossible. Their DNA shows they are as different as a Husky and a Chihuahua. This shouldn't be possible. How could dogs be this diverse so early? Today, we journey through evidence that challenges everything we thought we knew about dogs. If you love uncovering ancient mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe. What we reveal will change how you see every dog forever. Prepare yourself. We begin. In 2016, evolutionary geneticist Pontus Skoglund sat in his laboratory at Harvard Medical School, staring at a computer screen displaying a genetic sequence that made no sense according to everything scientists believed about dog history. He had just finished sequencing DNA extracted from a 5,000-year-old dog buried at a Neolithic site in Ireland. Standard paleogenomic work, nothing unusual. The goal was to trace how dog populations moved across Europe as humans spread agriculture. But when he compared this ancient Irish dog to other ancient dog genomes from across Eurasia, the genetic distances were enormous, far too large for populations that supposedly descended from a single recent domestication event. The Irish dog was more closely related to modern European dogs than to ancient dogs from the Middle East and Asia, dogs that lived at roughly the same time period. This suggested something radical. By 5,000 years ago, dog populations were already deeply divergent, already separated into distinct genetic lineages, already more different from each other than modern wolves from opposite ends of Eurasia. And if dogs were that different 5,000 years ago, how different were they at 10,000 years ago, at 15,000? Skoglund needed older DNA, much older. The breakthrough came through collaboration with zooarchaeologist Gregor Larsen at Oxford University. Larsen had spent years collecting ancient dog remains from archaeological sites spanning the last 15,000 years. In 2020, they published a landmark study in Science analyzing genomes from 27 ancient dogs across Eurasia, including several specimens dating to approximately 11,000 years ago, the early Holocene, shortly after the last ice age ended. The results were stunning. Even at 11,000 years ago, dogs showed clear genetic structure. Dogs from Eastern Eurasia clustered together genetically. Dogs from Western Eurasia formed separate clusters. Dogs from the Middle East showed yet another pattern. These weren't subtle differences. The genetic distances between these populations suggested they had been separated for thousands of years, possibly 5,000 to 10,000 years, which means the divergence began almost immediately after domestication itself, or during it, or because it happened multiple times. The timeline of dog diversity collapsed. What scientists thought took 10,000 years of gradual differentiation apparently happened in a fraction of that time. But genetics told only half the story. The bones told the other half, and it was even more disturbing. In 2018, archaeozoologist Angela Perry published an analysis of dog skeletal remains from sites across northern Siberia and Alaska dating between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago. She measured everything: skull length, skull width, jaw depth, tooth size, limb bone length, estimated body mass. The variation was shocking. Some dogs weighed an estimated 15 kilograms, roughly the size of a modern Cocker Spaniel. Others exceeded 40 kilograms, approaching the size of modern Malamutes or large German Shepherds. This is nearly a threefold difference in body mass among dogs living in the same general region during the same time period. But it wasn't just size. Skull shape varied dramatically. Some skulls were long and narrow, dolichocephalic. Others were shorter and broader, mesocephalic. The cranial proportions that define modern breed types already existed in these ancient populations. Think about that. The physical diversity that characterizes modern dog breeds, from greyhounds to bulldogs, from Great Danes to Chihuahuas, was already emerging 11,000 years ago. But there were no dog breeders, no kennel clubs, no breed standards, no written records. How? Here's where the paradox becomes inescapable. Modern dog breeds, the 200-plus breeds recognized today, emerged almost entirely in the last 300 years. Most were created in the Victorian era from roughly 1850 to 1920 through intensive selective breeding. Breeders chose which dogs to mate generation after generation, selecting for specific traits: size, coat color, skull shape, temperament. With careful record-keeping and controlled breeding, they created the breeds we know today. Even with that extreme, intentional selection pressure, it took decades to centuries to create each breed. Yet somehow, dogs in the Paleolithic, living with mobile hunter-gatherers who had no permanent settlements, no written records, no fenced enclosures, achieved comparable morphological and genetic diversity in the same time frame. The conventional explanation doesn't work. Humans weren't intentionally creating diverse dogs. They were focused on survival, hunting, gathering, avoiding predators, enduring harsh climates. So if humans weren't intentionally creating diverse dogs, what was? The answer lies not in human intention, but in something more fundamental: the structure of the relationship itself. Dogs weren't just living alongside humans, they were adapting to dozens of different human ecological niches simultaneously across vast geographic areas. And they were doing it fast, faster than anyone thought possible. But the evidence forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility about canine life, that diversification isn't something that happens after domestication stabilizes. It's something that happens during domestication, as an intrinsic part of the process itself.
Let's be precise about what the ancient DNA revealed. When researchers constructed phylogenetic trees, family trees based on genetic relationships from ancient and modern dog genomes, a clear pattern emerged. By 11,000 years ago, at least 5 distinct genetic lineages existed. Lineage 1, Eastern Eurasian dogs, found in ancient remains from China, Korea, and Japan. These dogs carried genetic signatures suggesting they descended from wolves in East Asia. Lineage 2, Western Eurasian dogs, found in ancient remains from Europe, genetically distinct from Eastern dogs, suggesting descent from European wolf populations. Lineage 3, Middle Eastern dogs, found in remains from the Levant and Anatolia, showing yet another distinct genetic ancestry. Lineage 4, Siberian Arctic dogs, adapted to extreme cold, showing selection for genes related to fat metabolism and thermal regulation. Lineage 5, Southern Asian dogs, including ancestors of modern Indian pariah dogs and dingoes, showing adaptation to warmer climates. These weren't minor genetic variations. The genetic distances between these lineages were comparable to the distances between modern dog breeds that look dramatically different. And this structure existed 11,000 years ago. But genetics is just information encoded in molecules. The real test is morphology, the physical form that genes produce. In 2019, zoo archaeologist Alwyn Evan published a comprehensive morphometric study analyzing hundreds of ancient dog skulls from across Eurasia dating between 12,000 and 3,000 years ago. She used geometric morphometrics, a sophisticated technique that captures skull shape by analyzing the positions of dozens of anatomical landmarks in three-dimensional space. The results revealed that ancient dogs weren't converging toward a uniform morphology over time. They were diverging. At 11,000 years ago, skull shape variation was already substantial. By 8,000 years ago, it had increased. By 5,000 years ago, it approached the diversity seen in modern breeds. Specific measurements tell the story. The cephalic index,
skull width divided by skull length, in ancient dogs ranged from approximately 50 to 75. Modern wolves cluster tightly around 50 to 55. Modern dogs range from 45, extreme dolichocephalic breeds like Borzois, to over 80, extreme brachycephalic breeds like bulldogs. Ancient dogs already spanned most of that range 11,000 years ago. Estimated shoulder height varied from roughly 35 centimeters to 70 centimeters, comparable to the difference between a modern beagle and a modern Great Dane. This is explosive morphological diversification. But here's where it gets strange. The morphological diversity wasn't random. It was geographically structured. Ancient dogs from northern regions, Siberia, Alaska, Scandinavia, tended toward larger body sizes, thicker bones, more robust skulls. These are adaptations for cold climates and endurance travel across snow and ice. Ancient dogs from warmer southern regions, the Middle East, Southern Europe, Southeast Asia, tended toward smaller body sizes, lighter skeletons, more gracile skulls. These are adaptations for warmer climates and different hunting strategies. Ancient dogs from agricultural settlements showed different morphologies than dogs from hunter-gatherer camps. Settlement dogs tended to be smaller, with broader skulls, morphologies associated with scavenging and guarding rather than hunting. The environment was shaping dogs. Different environments, different selective pressures, different outcomes. And it was happening simultaneously across thousands of kilometers in populations that had minimal contact with each other. But this represents just one piece of a much larger puzzle about dogs, a puzzle that extends into the genetic mechanisms that allowed such rapid transformation.
In 2021, a team led by geneticist Krishna Virama at Stony Brook University analyzed ancient dog genomes for signatures of selection, regions of DNA showing evidence of rapid evolutionary change driven by natural or artificial selection. What they found was remarkable. Different ancient dog populations showed selection on different genes. Ancient Arctic dogs showed strong selection on genes related to fat metabolism, ApoB, thyroid hormone regulation, TSHR, and muscle development, ACSL4. These are adaptations for surviving extreme cold and pulling heavy loads. Ancient Middle Eastern dogs showed selection on genes related to starch digestion, AMY2B, indicating adaptation to agricultural diets rich in grains. Ancient East Asian dogs showed selection on genes related to high-altitude adaptation and different dietary enzymes, suggesting they were adapting to unique environmental and nutritional contexts. Here's why this is deeply strange. These selection signatures were already present in dogs 11,000 years ago. Selection takes time. For a gene variant to become common in a population through natural selection requires hundreds to thousands of generations of consistent selective pressure. Dogs reproduce roughly once per year. Even with optimistic assumptions, creating these selection signatures should take several thousand years. But if they existed 11,000 years ago, they must have begun forming 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, right at the beginning of domestication itself. This means diversification wasn't something that happened after domestication, it was happening during domestication. The most remarkable discovery involves something called structural variants, large-scale changes in genome organization, including duplications, deletions, and rearrangements of DNA segments. In 2022, researchers at Uppsala University in Sweden analyzed structural variants in ancient and modern dog genomes. They found that many structural variants associated with modern breed-specific traits already existed in ancient dog populations 10,000 years ago. For example, the duplication of the AMY2B gene, which allows efficient starch digestion, wasn't a recent innovation. It was present in some ancient dog populations and absent in others, suggesting it arose early and spread through some lineages but not others. The AISP gene variant affecting coat color, already showing variation in ancient dogs.
The genetic toolkit for creating breed diversity wasn't invented by Victorian dog breeders. It was present in ancient dog populations, assembled during the first few thousand years after domestication. Modern breeders didn't create diversity, they curated it, selecting from variations that already existed. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence comes from demographic modeling, mathematical reconstructions of ancient population sizes and movements based on genetic data. In 2023, a team led by Skoglund published a study using sophisticated population genetic models to reconstruct the history of dog populations over the last 15,000 years. Their models revealed something unexpected. Ancient dog populations weren't large and interconnected, they were small and fragmented. Effective population sizes, the number of individuals successfully reproducing, were often just a few hundred to a few thousand dogs per region. Small populations experience stronger genetic drift, random changes in gene frequencies that can lead to rapid differentiation between isolated groups. Combined with selection for different traits in different environments, this created a perfect storm for rapid diversification. Different regions, different selective pressures, limited gene flow between populations, small population sizes amplifying both selection and drift. The result, explosive morphological and genetic divergence in just a few thousand years. The evidence extends beyond breed or behavior into the realm of canine evolution and genetics, into mechanisms that allow dogs to transform faster than any mammal species in recorded history. Here's the theoretical framework that emerges from the accumulated evidence. Dog diversification didn't happen gradually over 15,000 years. It happened explosively in the first few thousand years after domestication, then continued at varying rates in different populations. Gregor Larson at Oxford calls this the rapid diversification model. It proposes that as soon as wolves began living closely with humans, however and wherever that occurred, they encountered diverse and strong selective pressures that drove rapid morphological and genetic change. The mechanism is straightforward. Humans weren't uniform. Different human groups had different lifestyles, different environments, different needs. Hunter-gatherers in the Arctic needed dogs that could pull sleds and survive extreme cold. Hunter-gatherers in temperate forests needed dogs for tracking and hunting game. Early agricultural communities needed dogs for guarding settlements and controlling pests. Each context imposed different selective pressures on dogs. Large size and endurance in cold climates, speed and agility in warm hunting contexts, aggression and territoriality in guarding contexts, tolerance and scavenging ability in agricultural settlements. Dogs adapted to these niches rapidly because the selective pressures were strong and consistent. A dog that couldn't keep up with Arctic hunters didn't reproduce. A dog that attacked livestock in an agricultural village was killed. A dog too small to pull a sled was useless in Siberia. Selection was harsh. Response was fast. This forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about dogs, that they were uniform for thousands of years before humans began selectively breeding them, that breed diversity is a modern phenomenon, that morphological change requires intentional breeding programs. None of that is true. But there's a deeper explanation for why diversification happens so quickly. Dogs weren't adapting to one human niche. They were adapting to dozens of niches simultaneously. Think about the diversity of human lifestyles 11,000 years ago. In the Arctic, highly mobile hunters following caribou and seal, traveling hundreds of kilometers seasonally, requiring dogs for transportation and hunting assistance. In temperate forests, semi-sedentary hunter-gatherers with seasonal camps, requiring dogs for hunting, guarding, and companionship. In early agricultural settlements, newly sedentary populations with stored grain and livestock, requiring dogs for pest control and guarding, but not for transportation or hunting. In arid regions, nomadic pastoralists with herds of goats and sheep, requiring dogs for herding and predator defense. Each niche created different optimal dog morphologies and behaviors. Arctic dogs needed large size, thick fur, high endurance, low prey drive so they wouldn't chase caribou, and strong pack cohesion for pulling sleds. Forest hunting dogs needed medium size, keen senses, high prey drive, speed, and independence. Early agricultural village dogs needed small to medium size, high territoriality, aggression toward unfamiliar animals, and tolerance of humans. These are contradictory trait combinations. You can't optimize a dog for all niches simultaneously. So dogs diversified, with different populations adapting to different niches. And because these niches existed simultaneously across Eurasia, diversification happened in parallel in multiple populations.
Recent breakthroughs suggest we're entering a new era of understanding dog evolution. Paleogenomics has advanced to the point where researchers can extract and sequence DNA from increasingly ancient remains. In 2023, a team successfully sequenced DNA from a 23,000-year-old canid from Siberia, one of the oldest confirmed dog-like animals ever analyzed. The genome revealed something unexpected. This ancient canid was already genetically distinct from wolves, showing early signatures of domestication, but it wasn't a direct ancestor of any modern dog population. It was a side branch, an early experiment in domestication that didn't lead to modern dogs. This suggests the dog family tree is more complex than we realized, full of extinct lineages, dead ends, and populations that contributed genes to modern dogs but then disappeared. In the next decade, researchers will sequence hundreds of ancient dog genomes from sites spanning 20,000 years of history. Each genome is a snapshot of evolution in action, revealing how dogs changed over time, which populations went extinct, which survived, and how they mixed. We're approaching the point where we can watch dog evolution unfold year by year, tracking the emergence of specific traits, the spread of gene variants, the rise and fall of populations. The complete story of how wolves became dogs is finally within reach. If ancient dogs were already diverse 11,000 years ago, it transforms how we understand modern breeds. Modern breeds aren't artificial constructs created from generic dogs. They're refinements of ancient varieties that existed before agriculture, before cities, before writing. When you look at a Siberian Husky, you're seeing a dog whose ancestors were pulling sleds in the Arctic 9,000 years ago. When you look at a Basenji, you're seeing a lineage that may trace to ancient African dogs that never barked. When you look at a Saluki, you're seeing a breed type that existed in the Middle East before the first civilizations. Modern breeding didn't invent these dogs, it preserved and intensified traits that were already present. This has profound implications for dog health and genetics. Many genetic diseases in dogs are assumed to result from recent inbreeding within closed breed populations, and some do. Hip dysplasia in German Shepherds, heart problems in Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, breathing difficulties in brachycephalic breeds. But other health issues may be ancient, carried in lineages for thousands of years. A metabolic disorder affecting northern breeds might trace to an ancient Arctic adaptation that became maladaptive in modern environments. An immune deficiency in certain breeds might reflect ancient population bottlenecks. Understanding the deep ancestry of breeds could revolutionize veterinary medicine and breeding practices. Instead of treating each breed as an isolated population, we could map their ancient lineages, identify shared genetic vulnerabilities, and use ancient DNA to understand the origins of modern health issues. And this raises profound questions about domestication as an evolutionary process. Dogs prove that domestication isn't slow. It's not a gradual process requiring tens of thousands of years of human guidance. Given the right conditions, strong selective pressure, reproductively isolated populations, and consistent environmental challenges, domestication can produce dramatic morphological and genetic diversity in just a few thousand years. What this means for us and our understanding of evolution is staggering. Other species living with humans may be diversifying rapidly right now,
adapting to human-modified environments, splitting into distinct populations as they specialize for different ecological niches. Urban rats are evolving differently than rural rats. City pigeons show genetic adaptations not found in rural populations. Coyotes in urban areas are behaviorally and morphologically different from wilderness coyotes. We're witnessing the early stages of domestication in multiple species happening in real time, following the same rapid trajectory that dogs followed 11,000 years ago. Dogs weren't special, they were first. But the process they underwent, rapid diversification driven by adaptation to human ecological niches, is repeating itself in species after species as human civilization expands. We're not just changing the planet, we're driving the evolution of every species that shares space with us.
The most profound implications emerge when we consider what rapid diversification reveals about evolution itself. Standard evolutionary theory, as taught in textbooks, emphasizes gradualism. Species change slowly over millions of years through the accumulation of small genetic changes. Morphological diversity emerges through long periods of geographic isolation and divergent selection. But dogs violated every rule. They diversified in thousands of years, not millions. They achieved morphological variation rivaling species-level differences while remaining a single interbreeding species. They transformed without long geographic isolation, with populations separated by hundreds of kilometers still sharing genes through occasional migration. And they did it without intentional human design. Yes, humans influenced dog evolution through their lifestyles and environments, but Paleolithic humans weren't planning the emergence of different dog types. They weren't conducting breeding experiments. They were just living, and dogs were adapting to the ecological niches that human lifestyles created. The diversity emerged as an unintended consequence, a byproduct of the relationship itself. This is evolution without a designer, producing a parent design through purely natural processes, but operating far faster than Darwin imagined. It's unsettling because it reveals how quickly and dramatically life can change when conditions align. Evolution isn't necessarily slow and gradual. It can be explosive, transformative, and rapid when strong selection meets existing genetic variation. Here's what keeps researchers awake at night. Where did the genetic variation that allowed rapid diversification come from? Modern wolves show relatively limited morphological variation. Yes, wolves from different regions differ somewhat in size and coloration, but nothing like the explosive diversity seen in dogs. Yet dogs descended from wolves, so the genetic potential for diversity must have existed in ancestral wolf populations. Which means wolves carry hidden genetic variation that doesn't express itself in wolf populations because wolf ecology constrains it, but that erupted into visible diversity once dogs entered human-dominated environments. This is called cryptic genetic variation, and it's one of the most important concepts in modern evolutionary biology. Populations can harbor extensive genetic variation that remains invisible, masked by gene interactions or by environments that don't trigger its expression. But when environments change, when new selective pressures emerge, this hidden variation can suddenly become visible, allowing rapid adaptation. Dogs prove that wolves carried enormous cryptic genetic variation for body size, skull shape, coat color, behavior, and metabolism. Living as wolves, this variation remained invisible. Living with humans, it exploded into diversity. This raises a disturbing question. How many other species carry cryptic genetic variation waiting to be unleashed? How much hidden potential for transformation exists in every population, invisible until the right conditions trigger it? If dogs were already diverse 11,000 years ago, what were they like 15,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago? We don't know. Ancient DNA preservation declines exponentially with age. Specimens older than 15,000 years rarely yield usable DNA, especially in temperate and warm regions where degradation is rapid. But the question haunts the field. When did diversification actually begin? If dogs at 15,000 years ago were already morphologically and genetically diverse, then the process began even earlier, perhaps during the initial stages of domestication itself, or because domestication happened multiple times from different wolf populations. We're tantalizingly close to answering this question. New DNA extraction techniques, better preservation contexts, and expanding surveys of archaeological sites are pushing the boundaries of what's sequenceable. In the next decade, we may recover DNA from dogs or proto-dogs dating to 18,000 or 20,000 years ago. Those genomes will reveal whether early dogs were uniform or diverse, whether diversification began instantly or gradually, whether modern dogs descend from one population or many. The answer will rewrite the story of domestication and transform our understanding of how quickly new forms of life can emerge. We're one discovery away from knowing, or from realizing the question was more complicated than we imagined.
We began with two ancient skeletons, impossibly different, challenging everything we thought we knew about when dogs became diverse. And we've journeyed through evidence that makes that impossibility undeniable. Ancient DNA showing that by 11,000 years ago, dogs were already split into at least 5 distinct genetic lineages separated by thousands of years of evolutionary divergence. Morphological analyses revealing that body size and skull shape diversity comparable to modern breeds already existed in Paleolithic populations. Selection signatures demonstrating that adaptive evolution to different environments was already underway in the earliest phases of dog history. Demographic models showing that small population sizes and geographic isolation created conditions for explosive diversification in just a few thousand years. The scientific consensus has shifted. The old model, dogs remained uniform for thousands of years before gradually diversifying, is dead. The new model, dogs diversified rapidly, beginning almost immediately after domestication, driven by adaptation to the diverse ecological niches that different human lifestyles created. But here's what we've really learned. The story of dog diversity isn't about humans designing breeds. It's about evolution operating at maximum speed when strong selection meets high genetic variation in small, isolated populations. Dogs prove that evolution can be fast, that given the right conditions, dramatic morphological and genetic transformation can occur in thousands of years, not millions. And that has implications far beyond dogs. It means we're potentially watching the early stages of similar diversification in other species adapting to human environments: rats, pigeons, coyotes, even insects and plants. The evolutionary processes that created dog diversity 11,000 years ago are still operating today, transforming species we barely notice. Dogs were the first domesticate, the first species to fully enter the human world. And in doing so, they revealed something profound about evolution itself. It's not always slow, not always gradual, not always requiring millions of years. Sometimes evolution moves at the speed of life itself. The mysteries are endless. The journey continues. And somewhere, buried in frozen ground or desert sand we haven't yet excavated, there's a dog skeleton even older and stranger than anything we've found, waiting to teach us that everything we've learned is just the beginning.